podcast here at the Washington Times. I'm George Gerbo. You can find the District of Sports on all of your favorite podcast platforms, Apple, Google, Stitcher, Spotify, and more. Just search Washington Times wherever you get your podcasts and find the work of our talented sports reporters at washingtontimes.com/sports. They join me once again to break down what's going on in the world of DC sports. That includes Matt Paris, who's fresh off of week one with the Washington Commanders as the football season is underway. Matt, welcome back.
Hey, how's it going? Pleasure to be on.
Doing good, doing excellent. And Jacob Calvin Meyer, who's back from his football coverage and also as the baseball season winds down here in the DMV, which we'll talk about on the back end of the show. Jacob, welcome back.
Hey, George. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We'll start with the Commanders, and it's more positive, I feel like, than we've talked about in past seasons. They opened the 2022 campaign with a 28-22 win, coming back from being down 22-14 in the fourth quarter against the Jacksonville Jaguars on Sunday at FedEx Field. Just the vibe felt a little different. I mean, admittedly, watching the game, Matt, we talked about it last season where it feels like this team needs to score at least 20 points to be in these games. And you're seeing in the fourth quarter, this feels like another Washington game. And not only did it feel that way, but on the field, Carson Wentz, who went for 4 touchdowns and 313 yards, threw 2 interceptions. And they were essentially back-to-back drives for Washington that Jacksonville turned into 10 points. And so you wouldn't be blamed if you were a Commanders fan that you kind of felt that feeling of defeatism again. But in one of the more impressive displays by a Washington team in recent memory, they overcome that with 2 touchdown drives, including one in the final 2 minutes to come back and take the victory, and sealed with an interception on Jacksonville's final drive. A bit more resiliency than I would have expected to see out of this offense and out of this team, and kind of defies what we've seen from them in recent seasons, Matt, where they would get down and it would almost feel like hopeless. But for them to come back in the way they did and with the offense that they did, I think makes a pretty good statement about how this team can grow offensively.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I thought it was really the perfect encapsulation of the Carson Wentz experience. He's been so hot and so cold in certain parts, and to see in one game, I thought was really telling. I mean, for him to come back around and do it within the same game, to be able to overcome those lows, I thought was a good sign. And I think the thing that really stands out about this year's team is just the diversity of weapons on offense that they can throw to Curtis Samuel, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson. They really have a wide receiver core that they really haven't had in a while since the days of Deshaun Jackson and Pierre Garçon. So, it was an encouraging sign. We'll see if it lasts, but the crowd was amped at FedEx Field, which you can't always say, and they went home happy for a change.
Yeah, and that's a good transition, Jacob, about this first, we've almost kind of taken it for granted because this team's name officially changed in the spring to Commanders, and we've not known them as the former Redskins now for a couple of seasons with the whole Washington football team transition. It really is the beginning of a new era, although a lot of it feels the same. The colors are the same. The stadium, for all of its warts and faults, is the same in many ways. Your vibe and just feeling of what the energy felt like in this stadium. You guys have talked extensively about and people nationally have talked extensively about how the experience, of course, isn't up to the level of other NFL stadiums. And USA Today coming out with the much talked about rankings here in the preseason that this is the worst stadium in football. To back that up, Washington had the second worst attendance last season, 58,000 there Sunday, and mostly burgundy and gold, which you would hope to expect against a Jacksonville team that doesn't boast the most rabid fan base in the National Football League. But your sentiments, Jacob, about just how things felt from a game perspective and energy perspective, the first game as the Commanders officially.
Yeah, I think it would be fair to say that the fan atmosphere and the fan experience on Sunday was a step in the right direction. From the team's perspective, attendance was up a little bit on Sunday compared to what it was on a per game average in 2021. And, that's, a week one game, so maybe that changes some things. But on the other hand, you're playing the Jaguars. You're playing the Jaguars who don't, like you said, don't have a fan base that particularly travels like the Eagles, who the Commanders have coming up in their second home game in week 3. But to talk about the stadium a little bit, that's always something that people are focused on, going into a new season with all of the talk about FedEx Field and its problems and that were, highly publicized last season. But I think the vast majority of fans, and this doesn't just go to, my opinion, it comes from, the dozens of fans that I've talked to at games over the past 2 years, is that they obviously just care about winning. Like, sure, the stadium's not the best. I think one fan said to me on Sunday that I think he said outdated, and I think most people would agree with that sentiment. But at the same time, if this team goes 12-5, people aren't going to care too much about the stadium. Now, that's not an excuse, of course, because a really good stadium can attract some new people to the games. But at the same time, the product on the field is always going to be more important than where the team's playing.
Yeah, these are fans that packed RFK for many years into the mid and late 90s, and RFK feels like it was outdated maybe 10 years after it was built, and still there, of course, in DC. But yeah, you put a winning product on the field, and that will cure a lot of the angst around this team. To put a winning product on the field, Matt, as you mentioned, those receivers are going to be a big part of that. Just the distribution to everybody. I liked in your story, talking about how Terry McLaurin doesn't have to maybe feel like the bearing is on the weight of everything is on him, because you had Jahan Dotson who got into the act with 2 touchdowns, Curtis Samuel with scores. It was a diversified offensive attack that allowed for a big play to Terry McLaurin in the fourth quarter after he just kind of had a pedestrian first 3 quarters of the game. It opens up more, and Antonio Gibson, out of the backfield, it opens up more opportunities for this offense to not have to be so reliant on 1 or 2 people. And when the offense isn't relying on 1 or 2 people, then that allows you to keep opposing defenses off balance on who they have to key on.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think Antonio Gibson is a good example of that. I mean, even if you look at in comparison to last year, his role has pretty much changed. I mean, he still got 14 carries on Sunday, but they used him a lot more as a receiver, to use him more on running routes. He was a former receiver in college, and so they're really trying to take advantage of their players' skill sets. And you would say, why didn't they do so in the past? Well, I think Carson Wentz's arrival in DC gives Scott Turner some freedom to call plays and to do things that tailor more to players' skill sets. Now Gibson can run deep down the field, and he has a quarterback who can find him.
Simple things that we've been kind of waiting on this Washington team to put together, and maybe Wentz, for who a lot of people have questioned about what his longevity in this league is after bouncing around to Indianapolis and out of Washington. Maybe that coupled with coaching is allowed him to find a home here, and we'll see how that develops into week 2, which is on the road at Detroit. Matt will be there. I liked your story, Jacob, about the Lions for call it the hard knocks bump. They're not going to be the same old Detroit Lions. They were 3-13 and won last year, if memory serves. And they sold out their opening game. It was the first non-Thanksgiving sellout at Ford Field in 2+ seasons. And this week, even though they lose to the Eagles 38-35, this week they are favored by 2.5 at home against Washington. The first time in 2 seasons they've been favored in any game. It's something they showed enough, I guess, to give them that line, Jacob, in the fact that they were that I turned that game off as I was clicking around on Sunday Ticket, and just Philadelphia was up big. I was like, okay, and Detroit scored 2 fourth quarter touchdowns to put themselves back in it. Couldn't get the score to tie it, but after being down, they showed enough mettle and grit, as Dan Campbell likes to say, to be competitive, and that's something they'll probably end up showing again against Washington on Sunday.
The fact that the Lions are favored in this game, and that most people would agree that they're not a pushover anymore, goes to the fact that I think in the NFL this season there's even more parity than normal. I think there's 5, 6 really really good teams, but then there aren't too many terrible teams in the NFL this season, which is obviously something the league wants and is good for the health of the league. But when you look at just their offense, because they had such a good performance in Week 1 on that side of the ball, they have a similar running back duo that Jacksonville has, and Jacksonville had success on the ground with their 2 running backs, and James Robinson and Travis Etienne, and the Lions have a similar duo with DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams, and so those are 2 running backs that if Washington has trouble stopping the run, DeAndre Swift can break one, and Jamal Williams is also a reliable back there too to spell Swift. So I think that's a key going into that game. That for the Lions offense, you've got 2 good running backs, and people forget a little bit last season for them is that they had a lot of injuries down the stretch. Both T.J. Hawkinson and some other injuries there as well with Swift, and so they're healthy at the moment, and that's an offense that can probably put some points up on you if you're not careful.
Yeah, we'll see how much of a scoring derby it can turn into, especially with what Washington showed, and if they can outlast Detroit. Sets up a nice matchup in 2 weeks at home against Philadelphia. The Eagles will play the Vikings, another big winner in Week 1. That's a Monday night game for Philadelphia, and then they'll travel to Washington the following Sunday, and we'll probably get the best idea of where the Commanders are after that. Let's talk baseball real quick. The Nationals are unfortunately hurtling toward their worst season in franchise history and the history that they've been since they moved from Montreal here to Washington, at 93 losses so far. The mark 103 losses in 2009. They lost 102 games the year prior to that in 2008, which felt like me at the time to be the worst season in history. But I've tried to talk to people, Nationals fans and others, just the gist of what do you feel about this team? We obviously knew it was going to be a bit of a rebuilding year, and it's gone probably worse than most Nationals fans and probably Mike Rizzo and management thought that it would. And they're hurtling toward an even worse scenario and offseason. Contrast that, Jacob, with how Baltimore is doing, and I think it provides a perfect juxtaposition this week as the Orioles are in town for their final 2 games this season against the Nationals, and you had a crowd at Nationals Park, far more orange in the crowd than red and blue, and with good reason. The Orioles picked to finish last, pretty much blanket across the board by everybody in the American League East. They are 4th in the American League East, but more relevantly, they are only 5 games back of the wild card. At a time they were in the wild card position. They've got a bit of an uphill climb with Toronto and Tampa and Seattle in front of them. But to say they've overperformed expectations would be a vast understatement. And it kind of just shows that when you have the right baseball people in place and developing the right players like Ryan Mountcastle, that you can kind of put this together. And the Nationals and Rizzo, who you've reported, and they call themselves a small market team, even though they play in the nation's capital, that may kind of provide a bit of a blueprint and a map for how they're going to have to go about this in the future to mirror what Baltimore's doing after Juan Soto gets traded and everything that led up to that decision, and how long it took to finally find a suitor in San Diego. But looking forward for the Nationals after losing all of these great young talents and guys that they had under contract, it may be time to take and think a different approach in how they're going to build and develop this team.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at this rebuild for the Orioles, it's been surprising that it's ending this season. I think if you're the Nationals, they've said and Rizzo has said that his goal is to make this a quicker reboot. But if you look at how successful it's been for the Orioles, because it's been about 4 years, while that might be a little bit longer than what Rizzo's hoping for, if the Nationals rebuild ends up being as successful as the Orioles, I think they should be happy, right? I mean, for the O's, with the farm system that they built up, and you went to just how incredible their season has been so far and how surprising it's been. I think before the season, Fangraphs gave them a 0.1% chance to make the postseason, and it looks like they're not going to make the postseason. 5 games is probably an insurmountable deficit to make up in a wild card race with just 3 weeks remaining, although it's not impossible. But
Mhm.
the fact that they've been in the hunt for the past 2 months is impressive. And while it's surprising, it's not really confusing when you look at their roster. They just have a bunch of guys who are playing better than they did last season, right? It's like sometimes it's that simple. Like when
Sometimes it's simple trajectory. Yeah.
you get Jorge Mateo off the waiver wire, and you get him as a waiver claim, and then he ends up being maybe the fourth or fifth best shortstop in the American League. Santander has been a lot better this season than he was last. And you go to the pitchers. Dean Kramer's been a lot better in the starting rotation. Felix Bautista as the closer has been excellent as a 27-year-old rookie. And then the young guys being called up with Adley Rutschman, who is the most valuable player on the team on a wins above replacement standpoint, and he might be the best catcher in baseball. And then Gunnar Henderson has been up with the team for about 2 weeks, and he's playing really well too. And so, it might not end up with the Orioles making the playoffs this season, but frankly, that doesn't really matter this year. What really matters is that they're finally past that rebuild, and it's come a little bit quicker. And this might be a blueprint to tack on top of the Astros for teams to look at for the Nationals and other teams who are rebuilding to say, okay, this is the blueprint for us moving forward.
And shout out to Baltimore fans who have responded accordingly. That is a baseball town in a lot of ways, football town, of course, too, but they love the Orioles and always have. And when that team started winning, that was 30,000 people, for some weeknight games in Camden Yards there, as they were in the crux of it when they were in the wild card slot. It does look a little bit insurmountable, at least with playing it forward to next season. Like you said, it's got them in a better position than Washington, which I think a lot of people are trying to figure out the direction of this franchise. I don't know at some point if Davey Martinez won you a World Series, came in and steadied a management position at a time when they had churned through so many people, and Dusty Baker departed here ignominiously and wanted to stay here and loved being in Washington, and the history around Frank Robinson managing this franchise and the history of black baseball in DC. Dusty Baker seemed like a perfect guy to lead the Nationals for however long he wanted to. And that obviously didn't work out, and Dusty's in Houston now. But I don't know if it's going to end up with, if you start out this in 2023, like you did this season, how much more leash you give Davey Martinez. But also, Jacob, I kind of put some of that on management, where we're still in this weird interstitial space where the learners want to sell. And we've seen reports that Ted Leonsis owns the Caps and the Wizards, is interested, and a couple other people are interested, but we haven't figured out the ownership thing. And I think once you figure out the ownership thing, that maybe, allows you to set a course for what the future is going to look like. But now it just kind of feels like you're in this weird limbo phase where until the future of the franchise financially and ownership wise is set, and maybe those people want to bring in new management and new front office people, we're not going to have a clear direction on where the Nats go until that gets taken care of. Am I wrong in thinking that, or can it be a little bit clearer than that?
I don't think you're wrong necessarily. There are a lot of question marks for the franchise, not just on the field, but also with management. And I think nobody can really say for sure, and I think a lot of it would just be speculation to guess what the future for Rizzo and Davey look like next season and thereafter. But obviously everybody knows, looking at those two guys and this team, that maybe they're not on thin ice, but it's just a question mark. Nobody knows what's going to happen with this situation, and so maybe that does have to get settled before they can figure some things out. But what it doesn't change is what's going on in the minor league system, right? That's unaffected, right? Like you need to have these guys. You make that Juan Soto deal at the deadline largely because, aside from the contract dispute, because your farm system isn't good enough, right? If the Nationals had a top 5 farm system before the deadline, maybe they don't trade Juan Soto.
Maybe you keep him.
But they had one of the 5 or 10 worst farm systems in the league. And so you make that trade and you get a haul of prospects, and now those guys need to go out and start moving up the system. And we've seen some of that this year with some guys, right? We've seen some positives like Jackson Rutledge has really been pitching well in single A, and that's a guy that's had some struggles both with injuries and with his performance and his control. So that's been good to see. But on the other hand, you've got Brady House, who's their fifth ranked prospect. He was injured for most of this season, and he really didn't show too much power in the games that he did play. And so when you look at Robert Hassel and James Wood, and those are the two main prospect pieces on top of Mackenzie Gore and C.J. Abrams, who are now with the big club. You need to start seeing those guys improve. For C.J. Abrams, what's been good, he has shown some improvement in recent weeks, both defensively. He really can flash the glove, and so hopefully he can become more consistent at shortstop. But one of the few areas of the team where there isn't a big question mark on the field is the middle infield duo with Abrams and Luis Garcia. So that's a small positive if you're trying to search for them. But I guess the other guarantee is that you're going to have to pay Patrick Corbin $20+ million to really struggle on the mound, and maybe they take a tactic next year where they continue to throw him out there. He has 18 losses right now, and he's got a few more starts, and he could be the first pitcher in the majors to lose 20 games since 2003. Or maybe next season they look at moving him to the bullpen, and he has the velocity and he has a wipeout slider that maybe if you move him to the bullpen he could have some success, but that's a lot of money to pay for a bullpen arm. So that's a question mark for them as well.
Yeah, it seems like it's got to start, at the pitching aspect of it. You look at a team just above them in the division, the Miami Marlins, who have loaded their farm system and are doing it with a guy like Sandy Alcantara, who's arguably a Cy Young candidate this year. And for Washington, it's about getting those guys settled and start there, and then maybe that gives you some leeway to bring the offense along. But a lot of questions going into the offseason for Washington. Some of those may be figured sale-wise or not, but we'll be sure to keep tabs on it as the Nats head off into the offseason. And the Orioles look to be a little more promising, at least if you're a DMV baseball fan, headed into 2023. And just a quick note about the Maryland Terrapins, who are 2-0 after a 56-21 rout at Charlotte. Talia Tagovailoa throws for 4 touchdowns. He ran for an additional touchdown, racked up 27 completions out of 31 throws, 391 yards. His 87% completion rate, the program record now for Maryland, with a quarterback that had a minimum of 15 passing attempts, 87% in that win over Charlotte. It's a good bounce back for him after a little bit less than desired result against Buffalo. It's a game Maryland won their first home game against Buffalo, but the offense was more driven by the running game than it was the passing game. And for Tagovailoa to get into rhythm before Big Ten play starts, that's going to be key for Maryland if they're going to want to keep up with these teams in their conference and in their division, the Big Ten East. They've got one more game in the non-conference schedule. It's against Southern Methodist Saturday at 7:30. It's the first night game at Maryland Stadium since the Iowa game that was the first day of October last year, a game that Iowa ended up routing Maryland in that game, and which the Terrapins lost Dante Demas. So they're looking to kind of rebound and have a better nighttime showing for the first night game at Maryland Stadium in nearly a year. Maryland will be without cornerback Tarheeb Still. He had a freak accident in the locker room and had to have a tendon repaired in his finger, Coach Mike Locksley said this week. And he should be back when Maryland starts Big Ten play September 24th. So the offense is clicking. The defense could come along a little bit more for Locksley. Charlotte racked up 388 yards on offense in that game last Saturday. And so Maryland would like to get that tightened up before they head fully into Big Ten play. SMU, the final non-conference game, Saturday, September 17th, 7:30 p.m. at Maryland Stadium. That will wrap up this edition of the District of Sports. Of course, find us at Wash Time Sports on Twitter. And for both Matt and Jacob, Matt, you're headed to Detroit for Commanders Week 2. That's correct?
Indeed. Yep. So excited there. I've never been. So
Ford Field. Find Matt at Matthew_Paris on Twitter. And Jacob, tell the folks where they can find your reporting.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at jcalvinmeyer. Matt, just be careful when you're in Detroit to not get your kneecaps bit off by Dan Campbell. I've heard he has a tendency to do that.
I just read a description of the movie Barbarian today, and it takes place in Detroit. And boy, what a wild ride that was! As someone who doesn't do horror movies and just reads the Wikipedia plots of them, so wow,
wow,
that's a better option. I like that. I don't do gory horror either, but if I just I like reading the. That's a good. I'm going to pick that up for like people like you have to see this movie and be like, I'm just going to read about it and not have to put myself through that torture.
Pretty much.
Yeah, that's what I do with like classic books, like The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn or whatever. Like I never read the book, but I've read the Wikipedia page, so I kind of know what's going on.
You've got the Cliff Notes version, yeah.
Right, exactly.
This is good. I like that.
Man, we sound like millennials here, don't we?
Listen, it's too much content. And you got to. I don't have 3 hours to sit down. I'm watching sports like every night. I don't have hours to sit and watch movies. So that way, you just catch up on the movie that way. It's easier, and you can probably find clips on YouTube if you need to supplement your reading with it. Mm-hmm. A reminder to find all of our content. And if we branch into film reviews, we'll put that also somewhere. But Washington Times Sports, WashingtonTimes.com/sports is where you can find all of our reporting on the Nats, Caps, and Wizard season comes up, the Commanders, as well as the Maryland Terrapins, and find the District of Sports wherever you get your podcast. Just search Washington Times in any major podcast app. For Matt and Jacob, I'm George. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.